Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of Network Collective. In this episode, we are going to be challenging some of the sacred and tightly held beliefs of the networking community. So joining us today, we have two very snazzy guests. This is a great episode. We got some style choices there. So joining us first, Ethan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Ethan Banks. I spent 20 years building data centers in some capacity or another. Went through a bunch of certifications, which is one of those sacred cows we're going to talk about today. And I was a CCIE at one point in time. I am officially no longer, and we can talk about that, Jordan.
Oh,
and,
fun.
You might know me currently as the host of one of the several Packet Pushers podcasts, which you can find at packetpushers.net.
Awesome. And our second guest today is Mike Bushong. Mike, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Mike Bushong. I work at Juniper Networks. I'm on the vendor side. I know, right? Been working at networking companies for a while. I was head of marketing at Plexi. If you followed the Plexi blog, that was me. I ran data center and software at Brocade. Came back to Juniper so I could join podcasts just like this.
That was the whole reason why you went to Juniper?
That was the entire reason, was so that I could...
Wow.
I don't know. I think maybe we should rethink that. We don't get those kind of ratings.
You can't beat the money in podcasts.
Yeah.
All right. So Ethan, man, Ethan gave us the perfect segue into the first topic here, and we're gonna start off with certifications, right? So certifications are dying, right, Ethan? That's what's happening in this world, right? Certifications are just dead. They're not worth anything anymore. Completely irrelevant. Just not worth it. The paper they're printed on.
So I was interviewed for a network career, networkcareer.net, and that question came up. And my answer is that not that the certifications have lost value, but they've lost respect, is the way I would put it. So value, can you still get value studying for a certification? Absolutely, because if you dig in deep with the program that's the vendor has designed for you in that certification, you will learn lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff. It's going to force you to learn even more stuff than you normally would, because if you're like me, you learn the stuff you really need to learn for your job maybe or to solve a problem and don't go after the other stuff. The certification makes you learn the other stuff too. So there's tons of value there. But the respect has gone away because the cheating is so rife in the industry, and so a lot of people are just so fed up with it that they're kind of giving up on the program, I think is the way that I would compartmentalize it. So my position is, if your goal is to learn something, you're trying to improve yourself as an engineer, then yes, certifications have value. But it's a two-edged sword, though, because on the other hand, if you do that, you're going to learn a lot of vendor-specific stuff. And so there's a potential downside there depending on how you're trying to position yourself as an engineer.
Yeah, I can take a vendor side of this too. Everything you say, Ethan, I agree with. If you look at where the technology is going though, if we really move towards intent-based, if we move towards abstraction, if we move to things that sort of separate you from the CLI and the syntax, it's hard to see the certifications existing in the way they do now. So much of certification is, do you know the right way to express behavior in vendor-specific ways? If we move to this heterogeneous multi-vendor environment, I don't see the value holding up the way it has over the last 20 years.
It means the cert becomes something different, right? I mean, you still need to know network fundamentals. You can intent all day long and talk about the things you'd like to build, and then when it doesn't work and you got to troubleshoot it, or you're not asking for the right question, you're not asking the right questions because you don't understand the result you're going to end up with because of the way you express the intent, because you don't know what the heck you're talking about. If you get my point, you're still going to need training. You're still going to need deep knowledge of networking. I think that doesn't go away just because we've abstracted things away. It just means certain specifics that you mentioned, Mike, like the CLI stuff. Yeah, who wants to sit around at a command line and punch in stanzas to make the network do something?
And a lot of people, believe it or not.
There has been a history there, right, of people who have found their value. They're struggling to know what the new world looks like without a CLI. But I don't know, man. I look at certifications and maybe my path was different. But when I look at them, I don't look at them that way. I don't see them as CLI specific. While sure that's a component of it, man, I learned so much going through Cisco certification process, all the way through expert in the fundamental way things worked. And that stuff is going to carry on regardless of whether I'm doing it on Cisco or HP or Juniper or name your brand here, white box. It doesn't matter, right? OSPF is OSPF and link state is link state and distance vector is distance vector, and all those things matter. And so I kind of take exception with this whole idea that certifications are dead. I think one of the problems is that people who go through certifications kind of anticipate that they're going to match what we're looking at as we're looking forward. But that's not what certifications do. Certifications validate skills on things that are deployed today. So while, yes, SDN is coming down and we're talking about it a lot, we don't have a really great SDN certification. Well, that's because if we asked what SDN was, we'd probably get a better answer today than we would a couple of years ago. But it's still one of those things that we're figuring out what it is. And so certifications are very bad predictors, right? They're very bad at looking forward and giving some sort of validation of some future skill. But they're great at validating things that are out there today. And it's an awful lot of equipment from a lot of vendors that need expert level skills that certification is worth it.
And I think you're hitting on exactly what a lot of people are hoping to get out of certifications. Certainly what I was looking for earlier in my career. That was the way for me to climb the job ladder. I started out with CCNA way back in the day and got CCNP, CCSP, and eventually CCIE. Those were all stepping stones for me to have more responsibility in my job because I learned more. Proved it. Here's the certification that says I did it, et cetera. You really think that's still true now, though? That's still you can still climb that ladder? Because I don't really think it works that way now.
I do. I still think it does. Now, maybe not in the heart of Silicon Valley. Maybe not if you're in a really progressive DevOps shop in like the middle of Manhattan. But by and large, I really do. I completely agree with what you guys are saying, but I also agree with what Jordan's saying here. When it comes down to it, an HR department, they're going to have buzzwords and nonsense. I get that. But when I'm talking to an IT manager, probably a hiring manager, and then going through the interview process, which I did just about a year ago, they asked me some technical questions about, okay, what port is SMTP? How would you configure, whatever on an ASA? And I was able to answer those things, partly because of experience, which is why I would still argue that experience and hands-on training, if you want to call it that, or on-the-job training is still, it still trumps certification process. Nevertheless, I got deep into the weeds because of the certification process, just like Jordan said. And so that really bolstered my career, and it does today. Now, again, I don't work in the heart of Silicon Valley. I don't work at a really cool startup in Boston or something. And I don't think most people do. Now, does that negate the fact that that's where we're going? Not necessarily, but it also doesn't negate the value of a certification today. Now, I get that whole argument about it being less value because there's did this person cheat component and dumps and things like that, right? But that's what the interview process is for. So I'm not looking at this as, is the certification irrelevant? Is the certification dead? But is the process of going through vendor training, the elephant in the room is Cisco training, right? Sorry, Mike. You go through that, and you learn an incredible amount of knowledge, regardless of a vendor. Now, you said OSPF. Now, I could sit there and learn Cisco ICE. I get that. That's professional development towards something that's very vendor specific, but by and large, that's not the case. So I can pivot and move in things and build my career on that. So
the other thing that I've seen here is I think that a lot of people look at certifications like it's a zero-sum game. Either you're all in and certifications is the only thing you're doing, or you're not doing certifications at all, and that leaves you free to study other things. The best engineers I know have done both, right? They've done the certification thing, which allows you to have that structured study plan, and then they're naturally curious. They want to know how the other things work as well. And so I don't think it's a zero-sum thing. I think the idea is, there is a set of networking fundamentals that have been proven out for the past 20 some odd years that expert level certifications have proven very well to validate skills on.
Well, there's another point here in that certifications are going to give you a roadmap of what to study. If you're starting from ground zero, how do you even know where to start? Yeah. So I'm starting to get into cloud stuff. Okay, if I'm trying to figure out Amazon Web Services, where do you even start? Well, there's so much training out there. That's where I'm deciding to start. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go through some official training curricula and I may or may not go after certifications, but I've got that map that's going to help me go from basically not having a lot to hopefully having some pretty specific knowledge as I go through the program. And I think all certifications are useful for that. It takes you from that, I don't even know where to start, to, oh, I got a pretty good idea what's going on now.
I also
So
don't think
that all means.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say that it reminds me a lot of MBAs, right? So the question is, does the MBA get you the job, or does the MBA simply open the door, right? I think that the certifications are an easy way to filter out a crop of folks who, maybe aren't qualified. I don't think it opens the same number of doors going forward that it does, or that it did 10 years ago, though. And then there's a certain dynamic, right? If Cisco dominates 80% of a particular market, then 80% of the people of the network engineers have to be Cisco certified.
Yeah.
If competitive pressure drives that number from 80, let's say that the world split open and swallowed them whole, and their market share went from 80 to 25, right? Then the value of the Cisco certification is lower, right? Now it's not going to be 25, but they're probably not going to be sitting at 80, 70 points a share anymore. So when that drops down, the value of that particular certification is less. Which kind of brings me to the punchline here. I think that the comments that Ethan made about sort of architecture, I think that the way that you learn, I think the types of architectural topics that you cover, those are going to make you more or less well suited for a network engineering job. I think using the certification as a measure of whether you've gone through structured training, I think that's a useful thing. But I don't think it's going to be the golden ticket to some ridiculous payday going forward, because I don't think that the certifications have that power, from here on out.
So maybe I missed this, right? I think that's probably part of what shapes my perspective on this is I didn't have the golden payday, right? So I'm a CCIE. I passed a CCIE. I did it, 3.5 years ago. Like I didn't, I wasn't, 20 years ago when having a CCIE was like, it made you, king of the mountain or whatever. It was just one more person who has an expert level cert. I never viewed it that way. I always viewed it as some sort of structure. So maybe that's what's, skewing my perspective against you guys, because I just never had that expectation. And maybe I think we all agree on that the expectation that just passing a cert in and of itself is going to open a door for you like that on its own. It may help, but it's not.
Depending on the cert, there are certain conversations you'll have and people that'll talk to you based on your certifications, I think, to some degree, but I think that's fading a bit.
Yeah.
It didn't move the needle for me financially when I got mine, roughly 10 years ago. It just didn't. My employer was supportive, but it didn't change anything for me when I finally got through that exam. Mike, another thought on your, Cisco dominance currently. Well, right. I mean, if the market fractures, and we're already seeing that in a lot of different verticals, the market fracturing, and Cisco isn't quite so dominant, then what does that mean for certificates? I think that's yet a different question. You still got a lot of learning to do. You still got a lot of things you got to know. But instead of it being Cisco's so dominant, it's the one thing you can count on to jump into and climb the career ladder. Now it's not such a clear-cut thing, which doesn't diminish the value of certs, but diminishes the value of maybe a particular certification track and makes you want to think about some other strategies.
Well, I don't know how you even tackle automation. So if automation is going to exist in heterogeneous environments, it's more than just networking. Even things like that don't lend themselves very well to like a cookie cutter cert. Which actually I think opens up some white space for people to differentiate both their careers and also on the vendor side. You can imagine being an automation architect as an example, or a workflow architect. There's value in knowing how to think about that stuff. I think some of the Twitterati, guys like Edelman and Oswalt and those guys, I think have built a pretty strong reputation around thinking about the automation problem in a different way. And so I think there's a lot of white space. I don't know if the certifications will follow, because those companies tend to be newer and kind of emerging, and so they don't have the same money to pump into a certification program. So what happens if, for instance, Apstra takes off? Is there going to be a bunch of Apstra certs? There might be Apstra training. I don't know if the certs will follow, though, right?
All right. Well, how long, realistically, how long is it, or do you think it will be until so much is abstracted away, the CLI, that the nature of being a network engineer changes that much? I mean, I'm working on a CCIE right now. I've been working on it for like 18 months. It's killing me. And I've had some folks say, there's not that much value anymore. Maybe you should think about doing something else. You're already in a senior level, so what are you doing? But I'm like, I'm not so sure. Is it going to be in the next 3 years, 5 years, 7 years? Obviously, none of us have a crystal ball, but I still like to hear your thoughts.
34 years.
34 years. Okay. So in 34 years, I mean, I'm going to be on a beach, on my beach house. So what am I doing?
34.
But I mean, I think.
Do you see my point, though? Are we really going to be running intent-based, completely vendor-agnostic systems in the next few years, where my career today and my ability to pay my mortgage, and in a more idealistic ivory tower fashion, my pure knowledge of networking, it's still important.
That's actually a really, really great segue to another topic that I think we wanted to talk about.
Welcome.
So,
You're welcome.
Phil, you're amazing.
Thank you.
So we talked about this, right? So our industry gets really hyped about new technologies, like really hyped. I mean, I'm sure it happens in other industries as well, but it seems like there's a gigantic disconnect between the marketing side and the marketing and what the expectation. I know, Mike, I know. What's your title again? and the actual real life adoption rates, right? I think there's just some expectation that we're going to like have this transformed, fully software defined, fully orchestrated multi-vendor network like next year.
And we have no idea what that means.
So any thoughts on that? Because I think that's one of those things that I think a lot of people struggle with, because I think that there's this impression that everyone should be there already.
No, I think multi-vendor is a fantasy, by and large, for most organizations.
Yes, someone's on my side.
I don't know that I'm taking a side exactly. I'm just trying to reflect what I think the reality of it is. So the reality is, multi-vendor is it solves a problem for certain companies. There's certain companies that want a disaggregated solution. They want white box paired with an operating system of their choice that does these very specific things so that they can program it using, this tooling that they're comfortable with. And so they may end up mixing and matching vendors for that reason. Most companies, I don't think, want that. They want, if they could buy everything from Cisco or if they could buy everything from HP, they do that. And maybe it's been best of breed for a while.
From Juniper?
But I think...
Or Juniper.
Yeah, we see Mike talking Juniper there. Yeah, it's been best of breed for some of these companies, but I think you look at hyperconverged. You look at just the IT stack as a whole and being possibly single sourced, and some companies going, yeah, that works for me. Simpler is better.
Yeah.
I want all one vendor. I want it all to work together, and when it doesn't work, I'm going to call them and they're going to fix it. That's whether that's the reality of it. The whole one throat to choke thing. I think there are companies that believe in that. They want that relationship, and they want to do that big spend with the one vendor and have the big leverage and negotiating power each year when they do the refresh cycles. And multi-vendor isn't solving a problem for them. It's maybe making things more complicated. And so, why? Why would they do that if the solution they can get from one vendor is quote unquote good enough? And you go back to Cisco at Cisco Live and you listen to the messaging that was coming down from Chuck. And man, he wasn't talking about interoperability and playing with other vendors and we're going to make nice with the open. He was all about, I got everything you need, baby. Back up the money truck, dump it in my lap, and I'm going to give you all your technology. So I don't see multi-vendor realistically happening.
So you don't actually need. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, here's my soapbox though, about vendor lock-in. First of all, sometimes vendors need to be partners, and they can be. But at some point, when your vendor starts determining your strategy, that becomes a problem. And I think our industry has gotten to the point where they go to the vendor and they say, tell me what to do. What do I need to do? And the vendor says, give me all your money and then you'll do this. And then it doesn't work. And so leadership goes and tries to choke their throat, and they laugh all the way to the bank, right? So I think the thing that we have to challenge is, what value are we getting from our vendors, and are they delivering? And at some point, if there's only one player in the game, there's nobody else to go to and keep them honest.
So Yvonne, are you defining the idea of vendor lock-in a little bit more in terms of reliance on the vendor for your strategy, technology strategy, more than just that single vendor that you buy most of your gear from? So you see them as different things?
No, well, it's all kind of because it all ends up being the same thing. Some vendors have really intense machinery to work with purchasing and to make life easier for your purchasing department. And so it becomes not so much about the technology as the machinery of getting technology done. And I think that becomes something that we have to fight against as technologists, not, with our fists or anything. But yeah, I'm not saying go down to
Yvonne advocating violence here.
Yeah, don't take a baseball bat to purchasing. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just suggesting that we can get into a routine of letting the vendor drive us all the way to the bank to hand over a big truckload of cash.
So this got into a fairly heavy topic, and so I think there's multiple facets to this conversation. So we're talking about vendor lock-in as a component. We're talking about multiple vendors. We're talking a bit about orchestration because that's come up in previous conversations, and so I kind of want to maybe approach each of those just a little bit differently. We talked about vendor lock-in, just going to one vendor and buying a bunch of stuff from them. And yes, right now there are companies that do that. I don't think that continues forever. I think that there's some disillusionment that's coming, right? With the company that's been at the top of the chain, we're seeing that in the market. People are moving away from them more. It's not like some mass movement, but it is happening, right? And then we have this idea of white box. And so when I say I don't think a company wants to be multi-vendor, I don't think a company wants to support 12 different vendors in their network. That doesn't mean that they don't want to go to something like a model of disaggregation, right? Where I buy my network hardware from somebody and my network software from somebody else. Russ, who's a friend of our show, he's and Ethan's rolling his eyes, right? No,
not about Russ. I'm thinking about your comment about the companies that are maybe okay with buying hardware from somebody and software from somebody. If there's an economic model that makes that work, then that's going to start driving that. Other than that, I don't think that's going to happen.
Right. No.
And if you look at the disaggregated model, who's winning in that, or one of the winners in that space could be Dell. Why?
Right.
Support model. HP's getting behind that game too. They just announced a partnership with Big Switch. And support, one of the big reasons. Hey, you just got to talk to HP,
Right. But the compelling argument there, and the thing that I think that hasn't been made yet, is the idea that you buy your software on a 10-year cycle and buy your hardware on a 2-year cycle. So rather than getting locked in on some platform that marries me to hardware and software in the same cycle, I get locked in at different ranges, right? I get locked into my hardware vendor for a much shorter period of time. I can jump from vendor to vendor if for whatever reason. But nobody wants to sit there translating configurations from this device to this device to this device. No one wants to do that. And so that's why I say I don't think people are going to multi-vendor. They're going to want to run one vendor. But I do think people are looking for some flexibility eventually. I don't know how broad that's going to be because Cisco keeps coming out with great solutions. Juniper keeps coming out with great solutions. HP keeps coming out with great solutions where if you buy everything from them, there's this, you get these fancy features. Yeah.
See, that's the thing that I think is going to keep people in the single vendor realm right there. Because if you buy it all from us, it works. If you mix and match, some of it'll work and some of it won't. I don't think we're ever in this industry going to get a network abstraction layer that abstracts away all the things. It's not going to happen. You're not going to have a bunch of different hardware underneath and you got one orchestrator that orchestrates it all. I just don't believe it because there's not enough heads together on this, and everybody that's behind a lot of these open source projects and standards initiatives are from the vendors, and they're bumping heads about this thing, trying to make things happen their way.
I couldn't agree with that more because I think multi-vendor orchestration is just a fantasy. Right, I really do. I think the idea now, I have friends who work at Apstra and what they're doing is cool. If you fit right within their model, it's good. But man, the idea to me, multi-vendor orchestration is lowest common denominator. You're going to get the least amount of features that everyone offers in coordination. Right? That's what you're going to get because it's going to be so hard to say, okay, we're going to have this little piece over here that's vendor A and then they have this special sauce that does this. Yeah. And this over here is vendor B and they have this special sauce and we're going to make the two talk together come on.
Really? And that lowest common denominator comes in not just in software but also in hardware. You got chip vendors saying that. We could use the switch abstraction interface, SI, but, we kind of don't want to use that because it doesn't really expose all the features of our silicon. So, we used our own.
And speaking to the manufacturer's defense, right? They need a competitive advantage. What happens if multi-vendor orchestration really comes to be? Well, then it's a drive to the bottom, right? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for commoditization of all hardware, which is great for the consumer, but no vendor out there is hoping to see everything become commoditized. Like it's just there's just
we'd all just simplify our
competing
networks,
priorities. Yeah.
stop using fancy features and keep things as simple as possible, and stop turning the nerd knobs. Then it's all of a sudden it's not even interesting. It's just like, how cheap can you get me 100 gig and a whole bunch of 100 gig ports in a chassis? That's what I want.
Right, and then you're looking at your software as where you're really investing into the engineering. But I don't see that happening on a large scale unless something changes in the market.
Nevertheless, though, that's every third blog that I read is about that. Every third vendor is preaching that this is where we're going. And I do like the idea. It sounds really sexy. It's really cool. I love a lot of these. I love the intent-based networking concept. Which we could probably argue that it's more advanced orchestration right now anyway. But yeah, is that today, and is it ever going to really, really happen? And you're almost scared to say that, aren't you? I'm scared to say that on Twitter sometimes. I'm scared to get that explicit in a blog. And when I say scared, I don't mean I'm scared like frightened, but I'm a little cautious. Like I don't want to ruffle any feathers. But today,
Yvonne's going to show up with her baseball bat.
I'm ruffling feathers. Yeah. Well, I just don't. I read this stuff and then I'm like, man, I just don't really buy a lot of this stuff. Now, I mean, again, not that I don't buy the cool factor, that it could solve a lot of problems. I get that, but we're not there yet, and maybe we never will be.
So it's like
we're in the trough of disillusionment. Go ahead.
Oh, very good, very good. I was trying to think of that, Yvonne. We're on the same wavelength.
Drop the mic on the Gartner reference. Nice.
Yeah.
So I think the multi-vendor thing is an economic advantage. It's mostly, so it's not really a technical thing. I want some economic supplier leverage so I can negotiate better deals. To make that true, you actually don't need to introduce a second vendor. You just need the threat of introducing a second vendor.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think what ends up happening is that you're going to see people will pull out some of the nerd knobs over time, but only in domains that are relatively well enough off that they don't need the nerd knobs, or that the nerd knobs have become sort of ubiquitous and everybody has roughly the same functionality. We see that top of rack. You're going to see it in the spine. We're seeing it with Draft Lapikov and sort of the BGP based whatever. And so people going forward, you'd have to be crazy to go. If you were building from scratch, you didn't have any legacy stuff to worry about, you'd be crazy to build all the complexity in from day one, right? That should be a concession that you make only after careful deliberation. And so I think if you kind of look at the market, and I guess, Phil, kind of to your point, is it ever going to happen? I think it's absolutely going to happen, that this is where things go. I just think it's going to be in companies that are starting, in 2017 and moving forward. They don't have 30 years of crap they have to take care of.
That's fair.
So if you're, and so the question is going to be then, what percentage of overall IT spend is relegated to companies that are say newer than 2010?
Right. You're talking about adoption through attrition. That's a really slow process.
And this is why I think it's going to take forever. I think that we in general, what markets do is we tend to overestimate kind of how, or I guess underestimate how hard or how easy it is to move to something. So it always takes like 3 times longer than we think. And then once we're through that process, we underestimate how much of the market's going to move there, because we think that everything's going to hold on to the legacy stuff. That's just not the case, right? Once you go, you go. It's just going to take us 3 times longer to get there than we think. And I actually think that most of the blogging that so every third blog, I think, is sort of part of the problem. Because what we're doing is we flood the market out there with a bunch of stuff. It's all new. And then we force the companies to go evaluate it, and you're like, hey, go take a look at my shiny new thing.
I have a different theory, though, about why the blog situation. Those are the ones that get a lot of views, so of course you're going to write about that. Sorry, my trough of disillusionment.
You want me to write about intent-based networking? You want me to write about some new feature the IETF came up with for OSPF?
And from time to time, I do write about that kind of stuff because I actually am interested in some of those things. But you know what I'm trying to say, right, guys?
Well, ask the marketing guys how much of those types of blogs translate into revenue dollars.
Yeah.
At some point, we're going to have to rationalize it. The last 7 years, starting in 2010, 2011, when the SDN train started rolling, right? We all started building into the hype, and I remember sitting there in 2011 laughing at Cisco because they weren't doing it, and I'm like, what are they doing? Like they don't have an SDN story. These guys are crazy. Yeah, they were crazy smart. They let us all. Seriously, but they let us all keep talking about it, and the more distant the promise gets from the reality, it's like at some point you don't know what to do, and then you end up in Yvonne's point of view, which is, so if you don't know what to do, then what do? You go, you're sort of beholden to your vendor. Like, hey, I loved all that stuff. It's great. It's going to transform my IT. Where's the Cisco reps, card again? I got to order some more switches. And that's what we've created. And Cisco was brilliant to let us all punch each other out while they just sat there and cashed checks for pretty much uncontested for like 3 or 4 years.
That is a perspective I have not heard before. That's actually, and it's so true, right? Because all of us are now so disillusioned with the whole concept of SDN. Like, we all just kind of laugh, we roll our eyes. It's like, sure, now it actually means something a little bit, and whatever, like we're still buying switches, we're still buying routers.
That's actually the very end of the hype cycle. Yeah.
Right, we're still doing all the same stuff we've always done.
Switch port mode access.
Yeah.
Right.
Switch port access VLAN. Yeah.
I mean, that's reality. So I mean,
MLAG for the win.
What's that?
MLAG for the win.
MLAG
right?
for the win. Oh yeah, that's used everywhere. So let's talk about that a little bit. So we've there's been a lot of hype around SDN, and the new one, right? The new one is cloud, right? Cloud fixes everything. Cloud is going to make everything better. What do you guys think?
Yes.
I can't think stupid. So I'll tie this to the thought of no ops, which I think is definitely passed on the hype cycle. But the whole idea was like, everything's in cloud. We don't need operators anymore. We don't need engineers. Just put it all in the cloud and stand it up, and it'll be good. But you still got to design an application architecture that is using cloud and understand what's really going on in that cloud, so that your application latency and performance and resiliency and disaster recovery can all happen, and that you understand your cost profiles, so that you're not, if you just try to pick up your data center and move it to cloud, that's not what that's for. It's not how the whole thing is supposed to work. Oh, infrastructure as a service means I can shut down physical servers and run them in someone else's cloud, and it'll be cheaper. No, it will not. You need to think real carefully about all of that.
I've always wondered about this, right? Especially the economic argument. I never could understand it, because I understand cloud, right, has economy of scales, but the reality is they still have to pay engineers. They still have to pay for the same stuff you'd have to pay for to run it yourself. They still are paying all the physical infrastructure stuff. Like, these data centers aren't cheap. And so when it gets done, and then they have to make a profit on it where you don't. So whatever economy of scale that they have, like, it's going to be lost in the fact that they have to make a profit on the infrastructure, where you're making profit on whatever your business does.
Oh yeah,
that
they're charging massively for you to use that
Yeah.
infrastructure. Yeah, that's the point.
So I mean, there absolutely is places where it makes sense, right? It makes sense to pay and have that flexibility, and there's value in a lot of these cloud type deployments. I'm not saying that there's nothing there. In fact, there's a lot, but it's just the idea that we can just pick up our data center, run it in the cloud, and it's going to be so much cheaper and so much easier and so much more predictable. And I don't know.
So there's the cost argument. If the delta in cost between, say, a medium-sized company and like Amazon is very high, then you'll get an economy of scale argument. If the delta in cost is relatively narrow in absolute terms, then the economy of scale argument goes away. And so if you take a space that's rapidly commoditizing, like, say, top of rack, you're not going to get a huge advantage there, because there's not that much more meat to cut into. If you were to look at if you took giant core switches that are going to sell at much higher margins because they're not as commoditized, then you'll get an economy of scale argument out of cloud. Now, what people are using them for is for compute, and then the networking component tends to be essentially basic connectivity between application instances. In that case, you're not going to get a huge economy of scale. It's not going to happen. The math doesn't work out. And so anyone who's put together a business case that says, I'm going to go to cloud because I'm going to get this huge TCO savings, I think they're smoking a little bit of something. And in California, that's legal these days. But I think the argument to be made, though, I think there's a real question that says, especially around the certification issue we talked about at the beginning, is how do you want to staff it? Do you want your smart, precious resources to be working on a thing that's largely a solved problem, or do you want them to be working on something that's core to your business? And so I think you're going to see an agility argument and kind of an opportunity cost argument. And then and kind of to wrap this whole thing up in a little depressing bubble, the move to cloud. The move to cloud, I mean, I think there's technical reasons to move to cloud, but I don't think that the mass, kind of mainstream cloud adoption is going to be driven by a bunch of technical decisions. I mean, it will for some companies, but I think you're going to see, similar to manufacturing decisions, or when we decide we were going to offshore all of our engineering talent to to India or to Belarus or to the Philippines or wherever the cheapest locale was. I think you're going to see this led by the big systems integrators, the big consultants. It's going to be Accenture. It's going to be Deloitte. It's going to be a lot of the Northrop Grumman and GD and guys selling out a vision that says go transform your business. And they're going to roll in and they're going to sell it to the CFO. And the CFO is going to make a decision, and they're going to make at that point they're going to make a financial decision. It's going to be left.
But they don't
to the
have to
engineering
sell
guys.
them. They don't have to sell them public cloud. I mean, there could also be private cloud, which makes a lot of sense too.
I agree they don't have to sell them public cloud. What they're gonna do. So if you're an Accenture as an example, right? What you do is you build a practice around a common set of recommendations and you stamp it out over and over again. And so everyone looks at Accenture. They're a route to market. So we vendors, we look at Accenture as a way to sell more stuff. And so which cloud company, private or public or whatever, or all the vendors, who's going to line up behind that? And if Amazon gets behind that and says, Accenture, go stamp out your cloud migration movement, then Amazon's going to give them a ton of help. And whoever gives them the help, that's who's going to win. I think we're going to see, I think the people who think that cloud, like the folks who think it's going to be the way it is now, and think that cloud's never coming, I think it's delusional. I think cloud's coming. I just don't think it's going to be an all or nothing proposition. And to my earlier point, I think it's going to take way longer to get there than people anticipate. But when we get there, it's going to wipe a bunch of stuff out. And I think if you're not preparing for that, I think if your career has a 10-year horizon on it, maybe who cares? If your career has a 30-year horizon on it, I think you need to be paying attention, because you're gonna work your way into a corner, and it's gonna be you and the mainframe guy working on stuff, over at whatever company.
The things that we haven't been able to get rid of yet. Oh yeah, Bob works on that. Yeah, that's why we keep him around. But as soon as we shut that thing, I don't think Bob's gonna have anything to do. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you go to state government. That's your refuge at that point, maybe.
You said something interesting there as well, and that is that that not all of it's going, right? Like it's this again, yet another thing is not an all or nothing proposition. Cloud isn't going to solve all problems. Now I know Yvonne has had some exceptionally fun experiences with cloud connectivity and some of the challenges in and around that. And I know one of the things that just seems to like disappear is, all of a sudden latency doesn't matter. Like all of a sudden the physics of networking somehow changes because it's in cloud.
We have solved the speed of light problem. Just
right.
So you know.
Is it triple now? Quadruple the speed of light? I mean,
Yeah,
what is that?
right.
I forget what it is. Is it instant? We're into that
well,
now? Quarks and
so
quantum
I agree
connectivity.
100% with what Mike said. Like, it's coming, and we can debate whether or not that's the best move or the best technical solution. But I think to some degree, the business, and I've seen this at several enterprises, not just the ones I've worked for, but talking to other people who are in the enterprise, and the business is frustrated with IT. They're frustrated with how slow it is to move. They're frustrated that every time they want to add another application, it costs them $1 million. They are ready for something different, just because they're sick of it. And so we are going to do this cloud thing. And we're going to see how it works. And so we can talk about whether it's a good idea, and there are problems we need to solve around connectivity. But I do think that we have to understand cloud enough to be able to operate in that world, and to help explain some of those physical limitations, right? Yeah, I know that you can transfer hundreds and hundreds of terabytes within our data center with very low latency in a relatively short amount of time, and you don't understand why it takes that long to transfer that much data to the cloud. But here, let me do a little math for you. Let me explain a little bit about how TCP works, and that because you have this windowing process and this send-act process, it's going to take longer to get your data there because of the way the protocols function. And I think as network engineers, we can add value that way. But I think if we step back and go, yeah, the cloud's a phase. Yeah, it may be a phase, but it's probably like a 20-year phase before that pendulum swings back to where we are today.
I don't think it swings back, actually.
Really?
Maybe partially, but
I think you'll get a redefinition of what cloud is. I think things like mobile edge or multi-access edge computing will change it from like a large centralized cloud to a distributed set of resources at the access and at the prem. And I think that, and it's still, in my mind, those are still fungible resources. They can sort of move. They're still managed as a cloud. It's just a different definition. So I think where people have mostly wrapped their head around giant data centers, I think that notion's probably not going to going to be. It may be the dominant way. I don't think it'll be the only way. Certainly the telcos are going to use their central offices and sort of they're owning the access space to roll out MEC. And then you're going to see, especially like in Europe and also probably in Asia, you'll see different models. Europe, especially around data sovereignty between sort of where does the data reside. Interesting implications in IoT as an example. So all of those sensors are sending data somewhere. Where does that data live? And so the definition of cloud is going to vary. You're likely to get a bunch of smaller clouds or smaller resources distributed along like regional and national boundaries.
Exactly. I think that's you'll have localized requirements. There'll be compliance reasons. There'll be the things you were just citing, Mike. There's going to be drivers that mean you have to keep your data locally, and meaning you to compute efficiently on that data, you're going to have compute resources local as well. And so, right, you're never going to completely get rid of all of your local compute infrastructure, but by and large, if you can have it in public cloud, you're gonna. Over time, I think that's just going to be the standard way to do things. And then what our local infrastructure that remains looks like will be awfully similar to that public cloud, to the point of I'm almost wondering if we're going to see things like Amazon APIs become a standard, maybe, that takes over. Probably not, but maybe. There's some people talking about things like, well, S3 for object storage, that's kind of a standard. I mean, it isn't a standard, but it kind of is because almost everybody conforms to that. So maybe we start seeing some de facto ways of doing compute locally that mirrors what we see in public cloud. And that's where that time horizon comes in.
Well, this is why I like what Microsoft's done. I think the Azure stack actually is actually pretty aligned. Putting instances of that stuff on a micro server that sits on a prem box. I mean, that's actually a pretty hot idea. And so I think ideas like that are actually going to emerge. Now, to the earlier comment, I think we opened up with a comment about orchestration. You thought multi-vendor was hard now. I mean, so now start looking at multi-cloud. And then this gets me back to my point about when it was. So before we even get one thing adopted, we've already increased the degree of difficulty by like 10x or 100x because.
But this is not the trend, right? Like, I mean, so being an integrator, right? I see this all the time with my customers. Like they like a new idea, they want to implement it, they want to do it. By the time that they get halfway done with it, that idea is old news, right? Like we're on to the next thing just because of this hype cycle. I mean, it just takes
containers
so
and
long.
serverless. So you just get your head wrapped. Imagine a CIO. He's like, oh, okay, where's our container strategy? So their team is rolling it out this week. He's probably sitting in like a 3-hour review meeting, and as he's leaving, the guy's like, man, we got to go serverless. I mean,
how many Ethernet fabric products have come and gone in the last, say, 6 years? Tons of them.
Plenty.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know about 34.
34. That was the answer before, right? Number of years.
But yeah, things come and go, and we're seeing so much of that fracturing in the market where it used to be everybody buys Cisco. This is the way you build a Cisco network. How? We all learned it this way in our certification programs. That world is gone. That just isn't there anymore. Everybody buys what they buy for whatever their reasons are, and then the vendor's stuck in a lot of times with this really didn't get the momentum we were hoping for, but we do have these 50 customers that bought the stupid thing. I guess we got to support it. Maybe we can move them into something else over time by saying we're not going to add any more features to it. Maybe
I don't think that world is gone. I really don't. I think it is in the trickle down phase, big time. I try to offer suggestions on how to do some things differently at work from time to time, and sometimes they're met with approval, sometimes disapproval. But almost everyone, maybe everyone there, is younger than me or significantly younger and has an incredible comfort zone wrapped around their little CLI, and they stroke it and pet it and whisper sweet nothings to the CLI. It's comfortable and safe, and they're younger than me, sometimes by a decade or more. So I agree with you, Ethan, but I think we're still in trickle down phase. It's not gone.
I thought you were going to go the other way. I thought you were going to say the younger people were hey, old guy, why not get on the Python train, buddy, or something like that.
It depends on which circles you're talking about, right? If you're talking to certain people in certain circles, I get that. But by and large, people they're graduating from college with their 4-year degree, getting a help desk job. Oh, I'm going to go get a CCNA, or I'm going to, I learned some Python in college, and they're applying some things. So yeah, maybe there's more openness, but in my experience, I'm seeing folks that are even younger than me that are still stuck in that from the very beginning. So I still agree with you, though. Don't get me wrong, but I do feel that we're still in the trickle down phase where that's coming down the pike and it's slowly happening. I don't believe that entire world has just gone poof and we're in this brave new world of networking yet.
So
We're all on the hype cycles. We all listen to the news too much. We all listen to new product briefings. We all watch tech field day videos. We're all just in the middle of the maelstrom, right in the eye of the storm, if you will. Everything's swirling around us.
Absolutely. And when I get to work, I'm looking at things like, what are you talking about? And then I realize, no, this is about standard operating procedure here. I mean, this is the norm. I'm the one that's weird at this point. So,
yeah. Then Mike, I think I'll just put you on the hot seat for a second as a vendor. I think vendors see things from a standpoint of some very large customer accounts driving their decisions and products that don't trickle down to the mid-market, which is, I think, where a lot of us that have been building networks came from or are in right now. Not the not the 8 or 9 figure accounts, but the 7-figure and down accounts that take a longer time to adopt new tech.
Yeah, Cisco's cornered the market on like routes to market. So if the channel or the VARs fundamentally change, I think it opens that up. Now, I actually think there's dynamics that are going to drive that, by the way. So if we believe that there's increased competition will drive down pricing, which will have an impact on margins, then the standard response is to claw back margin. You squeeze two people. You'll squeeze your supply chain, which they've already done. You negotiate better deals for components, whatever. Next thing you do is you squeeze the channel, and so you'll force consolidation in the channel because you'll have the bigger VARs will take out the smaller VARs, and they'll do so at fewer points. When that happens, that's going to force the VARs to open up their catalog because it's an existential game for them. Either they exist or they don't. If they don't open up the catalog, they're dead over time. So I think that we're going to see existential change. I just don't think it's going to be in the mid-market enterprise. I think it's going to be in the channel first, and that's going to drive a change in what they consume. And then fundamentally, I think this changes the notion of what a product is. I think the product is not going to be the switch or the router or the server. The product is the migration. It's how do I get from old to new, and for whatever definition of old and new are. And so I think that the services and stuff actually play a big role. And that means that companies that we sort of talk about as if they're already dead, HP and Dell, maybe they don't die, right? Maybe that the services that they provide, the support, maybe that's the difference in terms of getting people from legacy to new.
In my years of consulting with a VAR, my customers basically did what we recommended. We came in the door. What are you trying to do? You're trying to get okay. Well, we got this Microsoft solution, this Novell solution, this Cisco solution, whatever it was. They were like, okay, well, you're going to support it. So if that's what you recommend, can we afford it? Work out the budget, get the bill of sale all typed up correctly, and like, all right, sign off and do it. We come in and install it, and then we'd support it. So right. If I'm walking in the door, they could have cared less if it was HP or who it was necessarily, as long as it was going to work and they could afford it. Those are the two things. So yeah, VARs driving change makes a lot of sense.
Well, so I think you're going to see a split in the market. I think you'll see that new companies will be born in the cloud and they'll stay in the cloud, and they'll do DevOps things in DevOps ways, and everything will be SDNified and NFVitized and whatever else, right? I think you're going to see mid-market folks who don't have the luxury of walking away from 15, 20, 30 years of baggage. And I think that when the market splits, you're going to force vendors to decide where they're going to go. And I actually think that this could make things interesting. I think it means that this is why I don't think we're going to get a one-size-fits-all for the quote-unquote enterprise networking market. I don't think there's going to be an enterprise networking market. I think there's going to be 2 or 3 or 4 different markets that have different requirements, and some of them will go hyper-converged, and that's because that's what they want. Some of them will go sort of, build their own cloud because that's what they want, right? And some of them are going to go public cloud, and some of them are going to try to thread the needle in between. I'll just caution the folks who think they're going to do, the best of all of those. I think if you fail to make a decision, that's the kind of place where you get squashed. I kind of describe this as a strategic straddle. So you can imagine, straddling two positions.
Perfect term.
I know, right? So you straddle two positions. That doesn't necessarily feel that great if neither one of those pans out.
That's hilarious. Well, on that, I think we are going to have to close out the show there. On that happy news, I have to go update my resume. Apparently, my job is short-lived and not around for much longer. If Mike's vision of the future, 34 years old, I've got plenty of time then. But before we go, I want to give my co-host here an opportunity to share where you can find them. Yvonne, where can people find you?
You can find me on the blog at esharp.net and on Twitter at Sharp Network.
All right, and Phil?
You can find me on Twitter at network_Phil, and the blog is networkphil.com.
All right, I'm at BC Jordo on Twitter, jordanmartin.net. You can find me there. If you want to find more excellent conversations like this, you can go to thenetworkcollective.com. That's our website. We are on YouTube. We are on iTunes. Like, subscribe, do all those fun things. We'd like to have you participate. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.